Welcome to Lumion Central, and in today's video we will be taking a look at the top 10 best pathways in Lord of the Mysteries. This ranking takes everything into account. I'm talking about strengths, weaknesses, freedom of characteristics, and advancement rituals. Make sure to hit that subscribe button for more pathway videos. Without further ado, let's get into it. Let's kick things off at number 10, where for the first time ever I'm placing two different pathways. Let's start off with the Mother pathway. At lower sequences they are exceptional in healing their allies, and at higher sequences they create life forms themselves, making it very useful for team battles and well helping your allies. Of course, Frankly does carry this pathway and showcase us the full capabilities of it, and I can't wait to see when he does become a demigod. Anyways, the second pathway in this spot is the Sun pathway. Think about the amount of times Klein needed someone to get rid of corruption on a mystical artifact or a Beyonder characteristic. Now that is exactly what the Sun pathway is about. They can purify virtually anything and are a direct counter to the Chain pathway, making them, well, me place them up here. Let's move on to number 9. At number 9, I am placing the Gambling, also known as the Monster or the Wheel of Fortune pathway. Now this is arguably the most useful pathway to have in real life, because whatever you need to get with luck, you will get. Winning the lottery, escaping from dangerous situations, and well, finding a demoness. Anyways, that's out of context, but it is just so useful, and the ability to control fate at higher sequences makes it a very strong one during battles as well. Let's move on to number 8. At number 8 is one of the most simple pathways in Lord of the Mysteries, the Hunter pathway. Yes, they gain increased physical capabilities with extreme strength, speed, and durability. Yes, they can lead an army of soldiers to win whatever war they want, but they don't have any mystical items or abilities that they get at these sequences, making them fall behind, well, sequences like the Fool, Error, or the Marauder pathways, or other pathways that gain these crazy outerworldly, well, capabilities that the Hunter pathway can't even fathom. But overall, let's not undermine this pathway. It's a very strong one and one of my favorites. Let's move on to sequence 7. At number 7, I am placing the Death pathway. Now Dally Hall and Zeke Eggers perfectly show us what this pathway is about. Lower sequences, it's all about helping your allies and communicating with spirits, nothing too crazy. And at higher sequences, it becomes an absolute monster of a pathway with the capability of staring at your opponent and killing them instantly simply by looking at them. So they become incredibly overpowered at the demigod level, but before that they are a decent support type pathway, making me place them this high. And let's move on to the next one. At number 6, but still lower than most of you expected, I'm sure, is the Door pathway. Now, if we're talking about raw capability and power, this could easily be number 3, number 2, or even the strongest pathway. But we do have to take into account that they have to explore the cosmos for their advancement rituals. Luckily, Force Wall isn't corrupted yet, but even Mr. Door did get corrupted by the Mother Goddess of Depravity. So this pathway is incredibly powerful, but the risk of corruption limits it to number 6 in my opinion. Let's move on to number 5. At number 5 is the Marauder pathway, which lower sequences severely limits it. At higher sequences, they can abuse loopholes and errors and steal virtually anything, including anchors and Beyonder characteristics. But at lower sequences, yes, they can steal jewelry and maybe a mystical artifact or abilities, but they don't have enough to keep them going, especially not enough physical capabilities, because they can die to even a gunshot at sequence 5 and 6. This is why it's placed at number 5. Let's move on to number 4. At number 4 is the most underrated pathway in Lord of the Mysteries. That is the Demoness pathway. They have absolutely everything in their kit. Think about it. Increased physical capabilities, especially speed. Well, they don't age at higher sequences. They have access to ritualistic magic. They have high spirituality, all at lower sequences other than unaging. And they have, well, seduction, which they can use to avoid fights or, well, do whatever else they want to do. The only thing blocking it and the only downside to it is if you are a man, you will transition to a girl. But if you can get over that roadblock, you get endless possibilities with this pathway. That is why it's placed this high, but the thing it lacks to be any higher is that it doesn't excel in one singular thing in particular. Let's move on to number 3. Of course, we all saw this pathway being in the top 3. That is, of course, the Visionary pathway. What can I say? They can turn invisible, they can affect the brain of their opponents, they can heal the brain of, well, their allies, and they can write stories into existence that will happen no matter what, being able to manipulate the whole world, well, as a sequence 1, not to mention as a sequence 0. Just a very useful pathway, with the only drawback being that they are very fragile at lower sequences other than their dragon skills, and if you were to catch them off guard, you could technically kill them with a bullet even at sequence 5. But other than that, you won't catch them lacking, and you can't see them because, well, they'll just be invisible. Let's move on to number 2. At number 2 is the Black Emperor pathway. Someone in my older video fully summarizes pathway in just one sentence. A little bit of this, a little bit of that. That's what it can do. At lower sequences, they already gain physical enhancements and mental enhancements. At mid sequences, they can use mystical abilities, and well, at sequence 0, they gain the ability to revive, the single most powerful and useful ability. They can keep on endlessly reviving as long as their order is intact. Well, if one of their 9 mausoleums is intact, they can simply revive within that mausoleum, but if they aren't, then as long as a new word they invented is still being used, a government they set up is still being used, a religion that they made that is still being used, as long as something is left behind from them, they can revive once again. Let's move on to number 1. Finally, we arrive at number 1, where I'm placing the Fool pathway. Of course, we all know that nobody wants to face a Fool user, especially not a high sequence one, because their crazy abilities such as Fooling, Grafting, and Historical Void Projection, all 3 being insane abilities. Of course, their rituals are relatively difficult, holding them a tiny bit back. But they aren't that difficult if you have a lot of time on your hands. If you are like Klein and don't have a lot of time, they can be very difficult. But if you aren't like him and like a normal Beyonder who has hundreds or thousands of years, you will be okay in completing them one day. And of course, lower sequences, a lot of people like to say they are very weak because they aren't that strong, but they are underratedly strong. They have, for example, some highlights are that they can control people's spirit body threats and turn them into marionettes. They can change the way they look, allowing them to sneak up onto opponents or escape opponents. They can use, paper figure substitution to avoid mortal wounds. They can use flaming jump. They can create bullets out of thin air. They gain access to divination, anti-divination, higher spirituality, and they are very nimble. So just very underrated lower sequences. We all know how strong high sequences are, and the rituals are a bit, less difficult than I believe most people think from what we saw from Klein. So this is why it places at number 1, simply because it's just so useful in everyday situations. It is incredibly powerful at higher sequences and a bit underrated at lower sequences in my opinion. But let me know who else you would put at number 1. Let me know what other changes you would make to this list in general and what other videos you want to see. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and see you guys.